The gunshot cracked through the autumn air, sending a flock of startled birds skyward as Beatrice Galloway stumbled back against the ancient pine, her heart racing wildly in her chest. It wasn't supposed to end like this. A routine botanical expedition in the forests outside Wickenburg, Arizona, turned deadly in an instant. The year was 1882, and the West was still wild enough that a woman alone in the woods was considered either brave or foolish. Perhaps Beatrice now conceded she had been both. "I know you're there," she called out, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I'm not carrying anything of value." The silence that followed was more unnerving than any response would have been. Beatrice clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest, the pages filled with careful sketches of desert flora that now seemed trivial compared to her survival. The rustling of leaves nearby sent her backing further into the forest, away from the trail she'd been following since dawn. That's when she heard a low, ominous creaking above her head. Looking up, Beatrice watched in horror as the massive pine she'd been leaning against began to tilt. Years of drought had weakened its root system, and her weight against its trunk was the final push needed to send it toppling. She tried to run, but the ground was uneven and her boot caught on an exposed root. The world tilted as she fell, and then there was only crushing weight and darkness as the ancient tree pinned her to the forest floor. Pain exploded through her left leg and hip. The breath knocked from her lungs. Beatrice gasped for air, struggling against the massive weight that held her prisoner. Dust and pine needles filled her nostrils as she fought against unconsciousness. "Help!" she cried out, her voice thin and ragged. "Somebody, please!" In the distance, Owen Yates rode his chestnut mare along the forest's edge, following the trail that would take him back to his small cattle ranch west of Wickenburg. At 32, he'd seen enough of the West's violence to last several lifetimes, and the gunshot that echoed through the trees had him instinctively reaching for his Winchester rifle. Hesitating only briefly, he turned his horse toward the sound. "Could be a hunter," he muttered to himself, knowing full well that hunting season hadn't yet begun. His mare snorted in response, ears pricked forward as they moved deeper into the pine forest. The woman's cries reached him before he saw her desperate pleas that sent him spurring his horse forward at a gallop. When he broke through into a small clearing, the scene before him stopped him cold. A woman, pinned beneath a massive fallen pine, her face ashen with pain and streaked with dirt. "Hold on," Owen called, dismounting in one fluid motion and securing his horse's reins to a nearby sapling. "I'm coming to help you." Beatrice's vision swam in and out of focus as the tall stranger approached. His weathered face was partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble, and his clothes a dusty denim shirt, worn leather vest, and faded denim pants marked him clearly as a working man, likely a rancher or cowboy. "Thank God," she managed to whisper as he knelt beside her. "Don't try to move, madam," Owen said, assessing the situation with a grim expression. The pine trunk lay across her lower body, the heaviest part thankfully missing her by inches. Still, even the narrower section that pinned her was massive enough to cause serious injury. "My name's Owen Yates. I've got a ranch about 4 miles west of here." "Beatrice Galloway," she replied, wincing as a fresh wave of pain washed over her. "I was collecting plant specimens when," she broke off, remembering the gunshot. "Someone fired at me, I think. I ran and then the tree." Owen's expression darkened. "There've been reports of bandits in these parts. Let's focus on getting you free first, then we'll worry about who's shooting at who." He stood and circled the fallen tree, gauging its weight and how it rested against Beatrice's trapped form. Years of ranch work had built his frame into something lean but powerful. If he positioned himself right and used proper leverage, He might be able to lift it just enough for her to pull free. "I'm going to try to lift this section," he explained, shrugging off his vest. "When I do, I need you to pull yourself out immediately. Can you do that?" Beatrice nodded, though doubt clouded her eyes. "I'll try." Owen positioned himself at her side, squatting next to the section of trunk that pinned her legs. He slid his hands underneath it, took a deep breath, and with a guttural roar of effort, he heaved upward. The muscles in his back and shoulders strained against his shirt as the tree trunk moved, not much, but enough to create a few precious inches of space. "Now," he commanded through gritted teeth. Beatrice summoned every ounce of strength remaining and pulled herself backward, dragging her body along the forest floor. Searing pain tore through her left leg, but the desperate need to escape overrode everything else. With one final effort, she yanked herself free just as Owen's strength began to falter. The tree crashed back to the ground as he stumbled backward, breathing heavily. For a moment, they both remained where they were, Beatrice on her back, gasping through the pain, and Owen leaning against a nearby tree, his chest heaving from exertion. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I think my leg is broken." Owen moved to her side, kneeling once more to examine her injuries. Her skirt was torn and dirty, but he could see the unnatural angle of her left leg beneath the fabric. Blood had soaked through at her hip, and her face was alarmingly pale. "You need a doctor," he said simply. "Nearest one's in Wickenburg. I'm going to have to move you, Miss Galloway, and it's going to hurt something fierce." She nodded, steeling herself. "I understand." With gentle but efficient movements, Owen lifted Beatrice into his arms. She bit back a scream as her injured leg shifted, burying her face against his chest instead. He carried her to his horse, where the challenge of mounting while holding her became apparent. "This won't be elegant," he warned, before adjusting her in his arms and somehow managing to swing up into the saddle while still holding her. Once settled, he arranged her across his lap, trying to stabilize her injured leg as best he could. "My satchel," Beatrice remembered suddenly, pointing weakly to where it lay beside her fallen journal. "My specimens." "I'll come back for them," Owen promised, though they both knew the likelihood of that was slim. There were still armed bandits potentially roaming these woods, and her scientific collections were hardly worth the risk. The ride to Wickenburg was torturous. Every hoofbeat sent jolts of pain through Beatrice's broken body, but she refused to cry out. Instead, she focused on the steady rhythm of Owen's heartbeat against her ear and the security of his strong arms holding her firmly in the saddle. "Almost there," he murmured as they finally emerged from the forest onto the road leading into town. "Just hold on a little longer." Wickenburg had grown considerably since its founding as a mining town some 20 years earlier. Though gold and silver strikes had diminished, ranching and agriculture sustained the community of roughly 500 souls. The town boasted several businesses along its main street: a general store, saloon, hotel, and, thankfully, a doctor's office. Heads turned as Owen rode down the main street with Beatrice cradled in his arms. He ignored the curious stares, focusing instead on reaching Dr. Morrison's office at the far end of the street. When they arrived, he called out without dismounting, "Doc, need help out here." The door swung open to reveal a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose. Dr. Morrison took one look at the woman in Owen's arms and motioned them inside. "Bring her in, Yates." "What happened?" "Tree fell on her in the woods," Owen explained as he carefully dismounted, still holding Beatrice against his chest. "Legs broken for sure, maybe her hip too." The doctor cleared examination table with a sweep of his arm, and Owen gently laid Beatrice upon it. She was conscious but barely, her lips pressed into a thin line against the pain. Miss Galloway, I'm Dr. Morrison, the physician said, already cutting away the fabric of her skirt to examine her injuries. I need to set that leg and it's going to be quite painful. I suggest laudanum for the pain. Do what you must, doctor, Beatrice replied weakly, Doctor. Morrison looked up at Owen, who stood awkwardly by the door, his hat in his hands. Yates, you can wait outside. But Beatrice's hand shot out, grasping weakly at Owen's sleeve. Please stay, she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Just hold my hand. Something in her pleading gaze broke through Owen's habitual reserve. He nodded once, moving to stand at her head, away from where the doctor would be working. When he took her hand in his, he was surprised at how small it felt, how delicate despite the calluses that spoke of a woman accustomed to work. I'm right here, Miss Galloway, he assured her quietly. Squeeze as hard as you need to. As the doctor administered the laudanum and began preparing his instruments, Beatrice looked up at Owen, her green eyes glossy with unshed tears and medication beginning to take effect. Most men would have ridden on by, she murmured. Why did you stop? Owen's weathered face softened slightly. Out here, we help each other. It's the only way to survive. Before she could respond, Dr. Morrison began manipulating her broken bone back into place. Despite the laudanum, Beatrice screamed, her back arching off the table. Her grip on Owen's hand turned vise-like, her nails digging into his skin, but he didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he placed his other hand on her forehead, steadying her as the doctor worked. You're doing fine, Owen said, his deep voice cutting through her pain. Just hold on to me. It'll be over soon. When the doctor finally finished setting the leg and began splinting it, Beatrice slipped into unconsciousness, her hand going limp in Owen's. He carefully extracted himself, flexing his fingers to restore circulation. She's lucky you found her, doctor, Morrison said, wrapping bandages around the splint. That leg will heal, but she's lost blood, and there's significant bruising across her hip and lower back. She needs rest and plenty of it. She mentioned someone shooting at her before the tree fell, Owen said, his voice low. Might be those bandits Sheriff Miller's been tracking. Dr. Morrison nodded grimly. I'll send word to the sheriff. Meanwhile, we need to figure out where she belongs. I don't recognize her. She must be new to town. Her name's Beatrice Galloway. Said she was collecting plant specimens. Ah, the doctor's face cleared. That explains it. Must be the botanist who arrived last week. She's staying at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house while conducting research for some university back east. He glanced at the unconscious woman. She can't be moved tonight. I'll have my wife prepare the spare room. Owen hesitated, looking down at Beatrice's pale face. Something about her vulnerability and courage stirred protective instincts he'd thought long buried. I should go inform Mrs. Henderson then. And perhaps collect Miss Galloway's things from where we left them, if it's safe to do so. That would be helpful, Dr. Morrison agreed, seeming mildly surprised at the taciturn rancher's offer. Owen Yates wasn't known for involving himself in other people's affairs. Check back tomorrow afternoon. She should be awake by then. With a final glance at the unconscious botanist, Owen nodded and left the doctor's office, his mind already planning the route back to where he'd found her. As he mounted his mare, he couldn't help but wonder what had brought an educated Eastern woman to the Arizona territory alone, and why someone might have wanted to harm her. What he didn't yet realize was how profoundly this chance encounter would alter the solitary life he'd carefully constructed for himself since arriving in Wickenburg 5 years earlier. Beatrice awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, confusion reigned as she tried to place the whitewashed walls and simple furnishings of the room. Then the pain in her leg reminded her of everything the gunshot, the falling tree, and the cowboy who had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers. "Ah, you're awake," came a woman's voice from the doorway. A plump, motherly figure entered carrying a tray. "I'm Martha Morrison, the doctor's wife. You gave everyone quite a scare, Miss Galloway." "How long have I been here?" Beatrice asked, her throat dry. "Just overnight. It's nearly noon now." Martha set down the tray and helped Beatrice into a sitting position, plumping pillows behind her. "Dr. Morrison gave you something to help you sleep through the worst of the pain. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been caught between a rock and a mountain," Beatrice admitted with a weak smile. "But grateful to be alive, thanks to Mr. Yates." Martha nodded, pouring a glass of water from the pitcher on the tray. "Owen Yates is a good man, if a bit of a loner. Keeps to himself mostly, runs his small ranch single-handed, and rarely comes to town except for supplies." She handed Beatrice the glass. "So everyone was mighty surprised to see him riding down Main Street yesterday with you in his arms." Beatrice sipped the water gratefully, trying to reconcile the image Martha painted with the man who had refused to leave her side during her painful ordeal. "He saved my life." "That he did, and he brought your things this morning too." Martha gestured to Beatrice's satchel and journal on a chair in the corner. "Said he rode out at first light to retrieve them. Found your specimen collection as well, though I'm afraid some of it was damaged." A wave of gratitude washed over Beatrice. That was incredibly kind of him. "He also spoke with Sheriff Miller about the gunshot you heard. The sheriff and his deputies are scouting the area now." Beatrice nodded, her scientific mind already categorizing and analyzing the events. "It could have been a hunter, I suppose, though I didn't see any game in the area." "Or it could have been the Rollins gang," Martha said grimly. "They've been raiding isolated homesteads between here and Prescott for months." 3 men, led by Jacob Rollins' nasty piece of work, who escaped from Yuma prison last year. The thought sent a chill through Beatrice. She had heard whispers about the gang at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, but had dismissed them as the kind of exaggerated tales that flourished in small western towns. Now she wondered if her dismissal had nearly cost her life. "Mr. Yates mentioned he would check on you this afternoon," Martha continued, adjusting Beatrice's blankets. "My husband says you'll need to stay off that leg for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. Do you have family who can care for you?" Beatrice shook her head. "No, I'm here alone. I was commissioned by the Smithsonian to document the botanical diversity of the Arizona Territory." Pride crept into her voice despite her circumstances. "I'm one of the first female field researchers they've ever employed." Martha looked impressed but concerned. "That's quite an accomplishment, but it does present a problem for your recovery. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house isn't suitable, too many stairs, and no one to attend to your needs during the day." Beatrice hadn't considered this complication. Her research grant provided enough for modest accommodations and supplies, but not for the extended care she would now require. "Perhaps there's a convalescent home nearby." Martha shook her head. "Nearest one's in Phoenix, and that's a difficult journey for someone in your condition." She hesitated. "There is one option, though it's rather unconventional. Let me discuss it with my husband first." Before Beatrice could inquire further, Martha had whisked away the tray and left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the throbbing pain in her leg that was beginning to reassert itself, as whatever medication she'd been given wore off. She reached for her journal on the bedside table, wincing at the movement. Opening it, she was surprised to find a pressed desert Mariposa lily Calichortus Kennedy carefully placed between the pages. It wasn't one of her specimens, which meant someone had added it. The flower was perfect, 3 brilliant orange-red petals surrounding a darker center with delicate markings. It was a rare find this time of year, and one she had been hoping to document. A note in unfamiliar handwriting accompanied it. Found this near where you fell. Thought you might want it for your collection. Oh, why? Something warm unfurled in Beatrice's chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. The gesture spoke of a thoughtfulness she hadn't expected from the taciturn cowboy who had rescued her. Her musings were interrupted by Dr. Morrison entering the room carrying his medical bag. "Good afternoon, Miss Galloway. I'm pleased to see you awake. How's the pain?" Returning with a vengeance, she admitted. "That's to be expected. I'll give you something for it shortly, but first I'd like to examine your leg and change the bandages." He pulled back the blanket carefully. "My wife tells me you're here alone on a scientific expedition." "Yes, I'm cataloging plant species for the Smithsonian." The doctor nodded, gently probing her splinted leg. "Admirable work. However, it does present us with a dilemma regarding your care." "So Mrs. Morrison mentioned. We've discussed options," he continued, unwrapping the bandages with practiced hands. "You could stay here, but our space is limited and we often have urgent cases needing attention." He paused, inspecting the bruising around her hip. "The swelling has improved, which is encouraging." Beatrice tried not to wince as he continued his examination. "What are the other options?" "Well, there's one possibility, though it's rather unusual." Dr. Morrison replaced the bandages with fresh ones. "Owen Yates has offered to have you stay at his ranch during your recovery." Beatrice's eyes widened in shock. "Mr. Yates offered this, but we're practically strangers." "I was surprised myself," the doctor admitted. "Owen keeps to himself, as a rule, but he has a proper house with a spare bedroom on the ground floor, which would be ideal for your condition. He seemed quite concerned about your welfare." "It would be highly improper," Beatrice protested weakly, though she was touched by the offer. "Normally, yes. However, Mrs. Morrison has agreed to accompany you as chaperone for the first week to help you settle in and ensure everything is appropriate. After that, Owen suggested that Mrs. Henderson could visit regularly." The doctor finished securing the bandage. "It's not ideal from a social perspective, but medically, it offers your best chance for proper recovery. The alternative is a difficult journey to Phoenix." Beatrice considered her options. The thought of being transported to Phoenix in her condition was daunting, but living under the same roof as the mysterious cowboy who had saved her life, that presented a different kind of risk entirely. "Would Mr. Yates be compensated?" she asked practically. "I have some funds from my research grant." "He refused payment when I suggested it," Dr. Morrison replied, seeming puzzled by this himself. "Said it was the right thing to do, which is about as much explanation as one typically gets from Owen Yates." Before Beatrice could respond, a knock at the front door echoed through the house, followed by Mrs. Morrison's voice greeting someone. Moments later, Owen himself appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. He'd shaved since yesterday, Beatrice noticed, and his clothes were clean though still worn. His eyes, a startling blue she hadn't fully registered during their previous encounter, met hers briefly before dropping to his hat. "Miss Galloway," he nodded in greeting. "Good to see you awake." "Mr. Yates," she replied, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "I understand I have you to thank not only for my rescue, but also for retrieving my specimens. And for the Mariposa lily, it's a beautiful addition to my collection." A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "Seemed ashamed to leave it behind," he said simply. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. "I've just been explaining your offer to Miss Galloway, Owen. She has concerns about the propriety of the arrangement." Owen nodded, as if he'd expected this. "Understandable. That's why I spoke with Reverend Phillips this morning. He's agreed to look in regularly, along with Mrs. Henderson. And Mrs. Morrison would help you get settled." He looked directly at Beatrice now. My ranch isn't fancy, but it's clean and quiet. You'd have privacy and a place to continue your work once you're stronger." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a man given to frivolous offers or hidden motives. Still, Beatrice hesitated. "It's extraordinarily generous, Mr. Yates, but I wouldn't want to impose on your solitude. Perhaps there's another solution." "There isn't," he said bluntly. "Not unless you want to risk that leg healing improperly by traveling to Phoenix, or paying for a private nurse here, which would cost more than your research funds could likely support." Dr. Morrison nodded in agreement. "He's right about that, I'm afraid." Beatrice was taken aback by Owen's directness, but also by his understanding of her situation. "You've given this considerable thought," she observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm a practical man, Miss Galloway. You need help, I have space, and your work is important." Seems straightforward to me. Put that way, it did seem logical, and while Beatrice had always been conscious of propriety necessary for a woman building a scientific career in a male-dominated field, she was also pragmatic by nature. If Reverend Phillips and Mrs. Henderson are amenable and with Mrs. Morrison's initial assistance. She began slowly. "Then I accept your kind offer, Mr. Yates, with profound gratitude." Relief crossed Owen's features, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Good," he said simply. "I'll make preparations." "Doc says you'll be ready to move in a day or two." Dr. Morrison nodded. "By tomorrow afternoon, I should think. The laudanum makes traveling easier, though it's still going to be uncomfortable." "I'll bring my wagon with a mattress in the back," Owen said. "Make it as comfortable as possible." He turned to leave, then paused. "Is there anything you need from your boarding house?" "My research materials," Beatrice replied. "There's a wooden case under my bed with specimen jars and pressing papers, and my clothes, of course. I'll speak with Mrs. Henderson," he promised. With a nod to both of them, he replaced his hat and departed as quietly as he had arrived. When his footsteps faded, Dr. Morrison gave Beatrice a speculative look. "In the 5 years Owen Yates has lived near Wickenburg, I've never known him to take such an interest in another person's welfare. He's dependable in emergencies, fought bravely when Apache raiders struck the Wilcox farm last year, but he generally keeps his distance otherwise. Perhaps he simply feels responsible because he found me," Beatrice suggested, though she suspected there might be more to it. "Perhaps," the doctor agreed, though he didn't sound convinced. "In any case, I believe you'll be in good hands. Owen Yates is many things, but dishonorable isn't one of them." As Dr. Morrison administered more laudanum for her pain, Beatrice found herself wondering just what kind of man Owen Yates really was beneath his reserved exterior, and why fate had brought them together in such dramatic fashion. Scientific training had taught her to be suspicious of coincidences, yet she couldn't deny the strange sense that meeting Owen had somehow been inevitable. As the medication began to take effect, her last coherent thought was of desert Mariposa lilies and the surprising gentleness of a cowboy's calloused hands. The journey to Owen's ranch 2 days later was every bit as uncomfortable as predicted, despite his best efforts to create a comfortable traveling bed in the back of his wagon. Every jolt and bump sent waves of pain through Beatrice's injured leg, and by the time they arrived at the modest ranch house, she was pale and shaking despite the laudanum Dr. Morrison had administered before departure. Mrs. Morrison sat beside her throughout the journey, providing what comfort she could, while Owen drove with careful precision, avoiding the worst ruts in the road. The ranch was closer to town than Beatrice had expected, perhaps a 30-minute ride under normal circumstances, but still isolated enough to offer privacy. As the wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, Beatrice took in her surroundings through pain-hazed eyes. The ranch house was smaller than she'd imagined, but solidly built of timber with a covered porch stretching across the front. A barn and corral stood nearby, with several horses grazing in a fenced pasture beyond. The setting was beautiful, nestled in a small valley with mountains rising in the distance and desert giving way to scattered juniper and pine trees near the house. "We're here," Owen announced unnecessarily, setting the brake and coming around to the back of the wagon. "Let me carry you inside, and then I'll bring your things." Before Beatrice could respond, he had climbed into the wagon bed and gathered her carefully into his arms. She bit back a cry as her legs shifted, burying her face against his shoulder instead. "I've prepared the room at the back of the house," he said to Mrs. Morrison as he carried Beatrice up the porch steps. "Gets the morning sun but stays cooler in the afternoon." Inside, the house was simple but surprisingly comfortable. Polished wooden floors, whitewashed walls, and handcrafted furniture spoke of care and attention to detail. Owen carried Beatrice through the main room, which served as both parlor and dining area, and into a small bedroom at the rear of the house. The bed was already made up with fresh linens, and a vase of wildflowers sat on the bedside table. "Mrs. Henderson sent over some of your things yesterday," Owen explained as he gently laid Beatrice on the bed, "and I put up curtains." He gestured toward the windows where simple muslin curtains had been hung, clearly a new addition. The thoughtfulness of this gesture struck Beatrice deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "You've gone to considerable trouble," he shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Wasn't much. Just wanted you to be comfortable." Mrs. Morrison bustled in behind them with Beatrice's satchel. "This place is cleaner than I expected for a bachelor's residence, Owen Yates," she declared, though there was approval in her tone. A hint of amusement crossed his face. "I may live alone, Mrs. Morrison, but my mother raised me proper before she passed." "Well, it makes my job easier," she replied. "Now, why don't you fetch the rest of Miss Galloway's things while I help her get settled?" Owen nodded and left them alone. Mrs. Morrison helped Beatrice change into a clean nightgown and arranged pillows to elevate her injured leg. By the time Owen returned with her wooden case of scientific equipment, Beatrice was fighting to keep her eyes open as the combination of pain, laudanum, and exhaustion took its toll. "She needs to rest now," Mrs. Morrison told Owen quietly. "I'll sit with her while you bring in the rest." Beatrice wanted to protest that she didn't need watching, but the words wouldn't form properly. As she drifted toward sleep, she was vaguely aware of Owen's tall figure in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher before he turned away. The next few days passed in a blur of pain, medication, and sleep. Mrs. Morrison proved an excellent nurse, changing Beatrice's bandages, helping her wash, and ensuring she ate properly. Owen kept his distance, appearing only to bring firewood, meals he'd prepared, or to ask if either woman needed anything. His cooking was simple but surprisingly good, hearty stews, fresh bread, and fruit preserves that he revealed had been gifts from grateful neighbors whose cattle he'd helped round up after a storm scattered their herds. By the fourth day, Beatrice was alert enough to begin chafing at her confinement. Her naturally active mind needed stimulation, and there were only so many times she could read the same 3 books Mrs. Henderson had sent over. When Owen brought lunch a fragrant vegetable soup with freshly baked cornbread, she asked if he might bring her research case. "Doctor said you should rest," he replied, setting the tray across her lap. "My mind is perfectly fine, even if my body isn't," Beatrice countered. "I'm going mad with boredom, Mr. Yates. Surely cataloging plant specimens isn't going to damage my leg further." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Suppose not. I'll bring your case after you've eaten. Mrs. Morrison, who had been sewing by the window, looked up with approval. It would do her good to have something to occupy her mind, and I must return home tonight, Doctor. Morrison can't manage without me for much longer. Owen's expression betrayed nothing, but Beatrice detected a momentary tension in his shoulders. Mrs. Henderson will be by in the morning, he said, and Reverend Phillips this afternoon. I'm not an invalid requiring constant supervision, Beatrice protested. At least, not beyond my physical limitations. It's not about supervision, Owen said quietly. It's about your reputation. Town's already talking about our arrangement. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. Of course there would be gossip. A single woman staying in a bachelor's home, regardless of the circumstances, was bound to raise eyebrows. I hadn't considered. That is, I'm so used to academic circles where such things are. Different, Owen supplied when she faltered. I understand. But out here, appearances matter. Not for my sake. I've never much cared what people think of me, but for yours. As a scientific woman, I reckon you can't afford scandal any more than I can afford to have folks think I'm taking advantage. His insight surprised her. Most men in her experience had been oblivious to the precarious nature of a woman's professional reputation. You're very perceptive, Mr. Yates. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Just practical. Now eat your soup before it gets cold. After lunch, true to his word, Owen brought her research case and set it carefully on the bed beside her. Need help opening it? I can manage, thank you. But as she reached for the brass latches, pain shot through her hip, causing her to gasp. Without comment, Owen unlatched the case and opened it, revealing neatly organized compartments containing specimen jars, pressing papers, magnifying glasses, and sketching materials. Impressive setup, he observed. The Smithsonian spares no expense for proper scientific equipment, Beatrice replied, the pride evident in her voice, though I had to fight twice as hard as my male colleagues for the same resources. Owen nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. What exactly are you researching out here? Surprised by his interest, Beatrice explained. I'm documenting plant species unique to the Arizona territory, particularly those with medicinal properties. Indigenous peoples have used these plants for centuries, but Western science has largely ignored this knowledge. You mean like how the Apache use creosote bush for infections? Beatrice stared at him in surprise. Yes, exactly like that. How did you know? A shadow crossed his face. Spent some time with the Apache after the war, before settling here. The casual reference to what must have been an unusual experience piqued Beatrice's curiosity, but Owen's closed expression discouraged further questions. Instead, she asked, have you observed other medicinal plants in use locally? This safer topic seemed to relax him. There's a woman in town, Maria Vasquez, who uses something she calls yerba mansa for wounds. Works better than anything the doctor has. An Amidst californica, Beatrice nodded eagerly. I've documented it but haven't observed its preparation methods. You think Mrs. Vasquez would speak with me once I'm mobile again? Probably. She keeps to herself. Mostly townsfolk are wary of her because she's Mexican and they don't understand her ways. But she's a good woman. Saved my horse last year when everyone else said to put him down. This glimpse into Owen's life and connections intrigued Beatrice. Clearly, there was more to the solitary rancher than met the eye. I'd be most grateful for an introduction when I'm able to travel. Happy to arrange it. He glanced at the door as the sound of an approaching wagon reached them. That'll be Reverend Phillips. I'd better go greet him. As Owen left the room, Beatrice found herself watching his retreating form with more interest than was strictly professional. There was something compelling about him, not just his physical strength, which had saved her life, but the quiet intelligence behind his reticence. Reverend Phillips proved to be a kindly older man whose visit was brief but pleasant. He brought books from his personal library, having correctly guessed that Beatrice might be hungry for reading material, and assured her that her presence at Owen's ranch was understood to be a matter of medical necessity by his congregation. "Mr. Yates is well respected, if somewhat mysterious," the Reverend told her. "His generosity toward you has only improved his standing in the community." After the Reverend's departure, Beatrice spent the remainder of the afternoon examining and cataloging the plant specimens she'd collected before her accident. Mrs. Morrison helped her prepare for bed early, as she would be leaving after dinner. "I've shown Owen how to change your bandages," she told Beatrice as she helped her into a fresh nightgown. "Though he might be too shy to offer, don't hesitate to ask if you need help. He's a grown man and you're a woman of science. Surely between you, practical matters can be addressed sensibly." Beatrice wasn't nearly as confident about this as Mrs. Morrison seemed to be, but she nodded agreement. After dinner, which Owen served in her room, joining her and Mrs. Morrison in a surprisingly comfortable meal, the older woman took her leave, promising to return in 2 days to check on her progress. And then Beatrice was alone with Owen Yates for the first time since her arrival. An awkward silence fell after Mrs. Morrison's departure. Owen stood in the doorway of Beatrice's room, looking unsure. "I'll be in the barn for a while finishing up some chores," he finally said. "If you need anything, there's a bell on your bedside table." "Thank you," Beatrice replied, equally formal. "I'm sure I'll be fine." He nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "I found something today while I was out checking the eastern boundary. Thought you might want to see it." From his pocket, he produced a small plant with delicate purple flowers. "Don't know what it is, but it looked unusual." Beatrice accepted the plant, her fingers brushing against his calloused ones in the process. "Penstemon Parry," she identified immediately. "Parry's penstemon. It's actually quite rare in this specific area." She looked up at him with genuine delight. "This is a valuable addition to my collection." "Thank you, Mr. Yates." The smile that transformed his face caught her by surprise. It softened the weathered lines around his eyes and revealed a small dimple in his right cheek. "Glad to help," he said simply. "Good night, Miss Galloway." After he left, Beatrice carefully pressed the penstemon between the pages of her specimen book, noting the location where Owen had found it. As she worked, she found herself wondering about the man who had so unexpectedly become her host and protector. What had driven him to the solitary life he led? What experiences had shaped him? And why had he gone out of his way to help a stranger when he seemed to prefer keeping the world at arm's length? These questions followed her into sleep, where her dreams were filled with falling trees, desert flowers, and a pair of startlingly blue eyes watching over her from a distance. The next morning, Beatrice awoke to the sounds of activity in the kitchen pots clanking, water being poured. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, grimacing at the stiffness in her injured leg. The pain had subsided to a dull throb overnight, which she took as a positive sign. A soft knock at her door preceded Owen's entrance with a breakfast tray. "Morning," he greeted her, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Hope you slept well." "Better than expected," she replied, noting that he'd shaved again and was wearing a clean shirt. "You're up early. Ranch work doesn't wait," he said with a shrug. Already fed the horses and mended a section of fence that came down in the night. He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot on the tray. "Mrs. Henderson will be here around 10, said she's bringing some of her famous apple cake." Beatrice accepted the coffee gratefully. "You've all been so kind." "I don't know how I'll ever repay such generosity." A flicker of something discomfort perhaps crossed Owen's face. No need for repayment. Anyone would do the same. I don't believe that's true, Beatrice said softly. Not everyone would open their home to a stranger or ride into potentially dangerous territory to retrieve scientific specimens most would consider worthless. Owen busied himself arranging items on her breakfast tray. Your work's important, he said finally. More important than most of what passes for business around here. The simple statement, delivered without flourish, touched Beatrice deeply. In the academic world, she had fought constantly for recognition, for acknowledgement that her research mattered. To hear this plain-spoken man declare its importance so matter-of-factly was unexpectedly moving. Thank you for understanding that, she said. Many don't. He nodded, seemingly relieved to have the conversation move away from his own actions. Eat while it's hot. I'll be outside if you need anything before Mrs. Henderson arrives. After breakfast, Beatrice attempted to make herself presentable for her visitor. Owen had thoughtfully placed a basin of fresh water, soap, and towels within her reach, along with a hand mirror. She washed her face and arranged her hair as best she could, wishing she had access to her full toilette items at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson arrived precisely at 10, bearing not only the promised apple cake, but also several of Beatrice's dresses that she had altered to accommodate the splint on her leg. Slit the seam and added buttons, the boarding house keeper explained, showing Beatrice how the modified garments would work. This way you can start wearing proper clothes again instead of nightgowns, even with that contraption on your leg. Mrs. Henderson, you're a genius, Beatrice exclaimed. I've been feeling terribly undignified receiving visitors in my nightclothes. The older woman helped her change into one of the modified dresses, a practical navy blue cotton with white piping, and arranged a light blanket over her legs. There now, you look like yourself again, she declared. Shall we have some cake? I asked Mr. Yates to join us, but he said he had work to do. That man would work himself to death if left to his own devices. Over cake and tea, Mrs. Henderson filled Beatrice in on town gossip, including the latest developments regarding the bandits who might have been responsible for the gunshot Beatrice had heard before her accident. Sheriff caught one of them, not Rollins himself, but one of his men trying to sell stolen goods in Prescott. Man confessed they'd been hiding in those woods, watching the trail to ambush travelers. Beatrice shivered at how close she might have come to a direct encounter with the outlaws. Do they know I was there? Could they have been shooting at me specifically, Mrs. Henderson patted her hand reassuringly. Sheriff says they probably saw you as a target of opportunity, not someone they were hunting. Still, it's lucky Mr. Yates found you when he did. Lucky indeed, Beatrice thought, though luck seemed an inadequate word for whatever force had brought Owen Yates to her side at precisely the right moment. After Mrs. Henderson left, promising to return in 2 days, Beatrice found herself alone again. The house was quiet, with Owen presumably still working outside. She decided to attempt standing for the first time since her injury. Carefully, she swung her uninjured leg to the floor, then using the bedpost for support, gradually shifted her weight until she was standing on one foot, keeping the splinted leg elevated. Pain shot through her hip at the movement, but it was bearable. Encouraged, she reached for the cane doctor. Morrison had left for her eventual mobility training. Just as she took her first tentative hop step, the bedroom door opened and Owen appeared, his expression changing from neutral to alarmed in an instant. "What are you doing?" he demanded, crossing the room in 3 long strides to grasp her elbow, stabilizing her as she wobbled precariously. "Testing my limits," Beatrice replied, slightly breathless from the effort and his sudden proximity. Dr. Morrison said I should begin attempting to move about after the first week. With supervision, Owen countered, his grip on her elbow firm but gentle. You could fall and make things worse. Then supervise me, she challenged, meeting his gaze directly. I refuse to lie in that bed another minute when I could be making progress toward recovery. I have work to complete before winter sets in. A look of grudging admiration crossed his face. Stubborn woman, he muttered, but there was no heat in the words. All right, but we do this properly. Put your arm around my shoulders. When she hesitated, he added, I promise to behave like a gentleman, Miss Galloway. This is purely practical. Suppressing a smile at his formal reassurance, Beatrice placed her arm around his shoulders. His arm went around her waist, supporting her more effectively than the cane had done. Even through the layers of her clothing, she could feel the strength in him, not just physical power, but a fundamental steadiness that made her feel secure. Small steps, he instructed. Don't put any weight on that bad leg yet. Together, they made a slow circuit of the bedroom. Beatrice hopping on her good leg while Owen supported most of her weight. By the time they returned to the bed, she was exhausted but exhilarated by the small victory. Tomorrow we'll try to reach the parlor, Owen said as he helped her back onto the bed. Give you a change of scenery. I'd like that very much, Beatrice replied, suddenly aware of how close they were, his face just inches from hers as he arranged pillows behind her back. There was a small scar near his left temple that she hadn't noticed before, partially hidden by his sandy brown hair. He must have sensed her scrutiny because he straightened abruptly, putting distance between them. Need anything before I get back to work? No, thank you. I have plenty to occupy me. She gestured to her research materials and Reverend Philip's books. Mr. Yates. She began, then hesitated. He paused at the door. Yes, I just wanted to say, I'm grateful. Not just for rescuing me or offering your home, but for understanding my need to maintain some independence despite my condition. Many men would insist I remain completely inactive. Something softened in his expression. My mother was a strong woman too, ran our farm in Missouri almost single-handedly after my father died in the war, never liked being told what she could or couldn't do. A shadow crossed his face. She would have liked you, I think. It was the most personal information he had shared since their meeting, and Beatrice recognized it as the gift it was. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, he said simply, and then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Beatrice stared at the space where he had stood, turning this new piece of Owen Yates' puzzle over in her mind. A Missouri farm boy whose father died in the war, who somehow ended up living with the Apache for a time, who now ran a small ranch alone in Arizona territory. Each fragment revealed made her more curious about the whole. As she returned to her specimen cataloging, she found herself listening for his movements around the ranch, the sound of his boots on the porch, his low voice speaking to the horses, the rhythmic chopping of firewood. His presence, even at a distance, had become a comfort she hadn't expected to find in this remote corner of the West. True to his word, the next day Owen helped Beatrice make her way to the parlor, where she spent the afternoon in a comfortable armchair by the window, her injured leg propped on a footstool. The change of scenery was invigorating, and she found herself making rapid progress with her scientific notes as she watched the changing light across the valley outside. Owen came and went throughout the day, bringing her refreshments, more books, or simply checking that she was comfortable. Each time, their conversations grew a little longer, a little less formal. He asked intelligent questions about her research, and she found herself explaining complex botanical concepts that he absorbed with surprising quickness. You have a scientific mind, Mr. Yates, she observed after he made a particularly astute connection between plant structures and their environmental adaptations. He looked almost embarrassed at the compliment. Just practical experience. When you live off the land, you notice things. Observation is the foundation of science, she replied. Many of my colleagues with advanced degrees lack your natural insight. A flush colored his tanned cheeks. Had some schooling before the war. Nothing fancy, just the local teacher taking an interest in a farm boy who liked to read. You enjoy reading? Beatrice glanced at the small bookshelf in the corner, noting volumes of Thoreau, Emerson, and surprisingly, several scientific texts. Following her gaze, Owen shrugged. Not much else to do during long winter evenings. Order books from a shop in Tucson a few times a year. This glimpse into his private intellectual life intrigued Beatrice further. Owen Yates, she was discovering, defied easy categorization. He was neither the simple cowboy she had initially assumed nor entirely the educated man his book collection suggested. He existed somewhere in between, self-taught, observant, thoughtful but practical. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Each morning, Owen would help Beatrice to the parlor after breakfast, where she would work on her research while he attended to ranch duties. In the afternoons, when the sun made the parlor too warm, he would help her back to her room. Regular visitors: Mrs. Henderson, Reverend Phillips, Dr. Morrison provided company and news from town, but increasingly, Beatrice found herself looking forward to the quiet evenings when it was just her and Owen. Sometimes they would talk about her research, about books they had both read, about the changing seasons and what they meant for the land. Other times, they would sit in comfortable silence, Owen whittling or mending tack while Beatrice sketched or wrote in her journal. Gradually, as her strength improved, their daily walking practice extended from simple circuits of the room to short ventures onto the porch, where Beatrice could sit and breathe the fresh air, taking in the beauty of Owen's small ranch. Dr. Morrison pronounced her healing well ahead of schedule, attributing it to her youth, determination, and good care. "You've done a fine job looking after her, Yates," the doctor said during one visit, when he thought Beatrice couldn't hear from her bedroom. "Never would have expected you had it in you." "She's an easy patient," Owen replied. "Determined to recover, follows instructions when they make sense, questions them when they don't." The doctor chuckled. "Sounds like she's got your measure." "Haven't seen you this animated in all the years you've been here." "Don't know what you mean," Owen said, a defensive edge entering his voice. "I think you do," the doctor replied. "There's no shame in it, son. Life's too short and too hard out here to ignore a chance at happiness when it quite literally falls in your path." Beatrice felt her cheeks burning as she realized what the doctor was implying, and more disconcertingly, that she wasn't entirely opposed to the notion. Somewhere between being rescued from beneath a fallen tree and these quiet days of recovery, her feelings toward Owen Yates had evolved from gratitude to admiration, to something warmer and more complicated. But she had her career to consider. Her research grant would eventually end, and she would be expected back in Washington to present her findings. The Smithsonian hadn't sent her west to find romance, they had sent her to document plant species. And as the first female botanist they had trusted with a solo expedition, she carried the weight of proving that women could conduct serious scientific work without distraction. These thoughts preoccupied her over the following days, making her uncharacteristically quiet during their evening conversations. Owen noticed he was far too observant not to, but respected her withdrawal, limiting their interactions to necessary assistance and polite inquiries about her comfort. The distance between them grew until it was almost tangible, a presence in the room as real as the furniture. Beatrice told herself it was for the best. In another month, her leg would be healed enough for her to return to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house and complete her research independently. Then she would return east, and Owen Yates would become nothing more than a footnote in her expedition journal, the cowboy who had saved her life and hosted her recovery. Why, then, did the thought fill her with such unexpected hollowness? The turning point came nearly a month after her arrival at the ranch. Beatrice had progressed to walking short distances with just the cane for support, and Owen had suggested a trip to the small stream that ran along the western edge of his property. "The cottonwoods are turning golden," he explained. "Thought you might want to see them, maybe collect some specimens before the leaves fall." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion, remembering her work when she herself had been neglecting it in favor of melancholy introspection, touched something in Beatrice. "I'd like that very much," she said softly, "if you're sure it's not too far for me to manage." "I'll have the wagon ready if you get tired," he assured her, "but the exercise would do you good, according to Dr. Morrison." The morning was crisp and clear, autumn firmly established in the landscape. Owen walked beside Beatrice, matching his long stride to her slower pace, ready to offer support if her strength faltered, but allowing her the dignity of making the journey under her own power. The stream, when they reached it, was more beautiful than Beatrice had imagined, a ribbon of silver water cutting through golden cottonwoods, with rocky outcroppings providing natural seating areas. Owen had brought a blanket, which he spread on a flat boulder near the water's edge. "Your outdoor parlor, madam," he said with a formal gesture that made Beatrice smile despite herself. "It's lovely," she said, carefully lowering herself onto the blanket. "Thank you for bringing me here." Owen settled on a nearby rock, giving her space but remaining close enough for conversation. "Used to come here to think when I first bought this place," he admitted. "Something peaceful about moving water." Beatrice nodded in agreement, watching the play of sunlight on the stream's surface. "In my work, I've observed that the richest diversity of plant life often occurs at the boundaries between ecosystems, where forest meets meadow or desert meets water. It's as if the tension between different environments creates something more vibrant than either could alone." "Boundaries," Owen repeated thoughtfully. "Guess that's true for people too sometimes. Those caught between different worlds often see things others miss." Something in his tone made Beatrice look at him more closely. "Is that how you see yourself? Between worlds?" He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "After the war, I couldn't go back to Missouri. Too many ghosts. Drifted west, ended up captured by a band of Apache during a raid." Beatrice listened intently, understanding that this was a story he rarely shared. "Expected to die," he continued. "Instead, the medicine man Nahilze was his name, convinced the others to spare me. Said he'd had a vision that I would save his grandson's life someday." A faint smile touched Owen's lips. Turned out he was right. Boy fell into a ravine during a thunderstorm 6 months later. I was the only one close enough to reach him before the flash flood hit. "So you lived with them?" Beatrice prompted gently when he paused. 2 years. "Learned their ways, their respect for the land. When the army started forcing tribes onto reservations, Nahilze told me to go. Said I needed to live in the white man's world again, but carry what I'd learned with me." His eyes met hers directly. "So that's what I've done. Built this place as a kind of boundary land, not fully in either world, but taking the best from both." The personal revelation stunned Beatrice. It explained so much about him: his knowledge of native plants, his self-sufficiency, his distance from town life. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said softly. "I understand better now why my research interests you. You're mapping boundaries too," he observed. between Western science and indigenous knowledge, between male and female domains of study, between East and West. His insight into her work, seeing layers of meaning she herself sometimes overlooked in the details of data collection, left Beatrice momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged huskier than usual. "Yes, that's remarkably perceptive." "Not really," he shrugged. "Just observing what's in front of me." Something shifted in that moment between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, despite their outwardly different paths. Beatrice felt the walls she'd carefully constructed beginning to crumble. "Owen," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I've been distant these past days, and you deserve to know why." He waited, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the words difficult after a lifetime of presenting strength to a world skeptical of female capability. "Afraid of what's happening between us, afraid of compromising the work I've fought so hard to be allowed to do, afraid of," she faltered briefly, "of caring for someone whose life is here when mine is elsewhere." "I know," he said simply. "Never expected you to stay, Beatrice. You have your path, I have mine." "Then why," she began, but he interrupted gently. "Why help you? Why spend time with you? Why share things I haven't told another soul in years?" A rueful smile crossed his face. "Because some things are worth the pain that comes after. Because meeting you has been like finding water in the desert, and I'd rather have that briefly than spend a lifetime parched." The raw honesty of his words moved her deeply. Here was a man who understood sacrifice, who respected her work and her independence, who offered connection without demands. How rare that was, how precious. The world isn't kind to women who try to balance personal happiness with professional ambition, she said softly. One misstep, one hint of scandal or distraction, and everything I've worked for could be lost. "I understand," Owen replied. "And I would never ask you to choose between your work and anything else." He stood, offering her his hand. "We should head back before you overtire yourself." Beatrice took his hand, but instead of using it to rise, she held it firmly between both of hers. "I'm not finished," she said, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. "I meant what I said about the richest diversity occurring at boundaries. Perhaps there is a way to honor both paths rather than choosing between them." Hope flickered in Owen's eyes, quickly tempered with caution. "What are you saying, Beatrice?" "I'm saying that I don't have answers yet, but I'm not willing to dismiss the possibility that we might find them together." She released his hand and rose carefully to her feet. "My research here continues through spring. That gives us time to explore what might be possible, doesn't it?" The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Yes," he said simply. "I believe it does." As they walked back to the ranch house, slower than their journey out due to Beatrice's tiring leg, Owen's hand occasionally brushed against hers, not taking, not demanding, but offering connection if she chose to accept it. By the time they reached the porch, her fingers were firmly entwined with his, a boundary crossed by mutual consent. That evening, as they sat before the fireplace sharing a simple meal, the tension that had haunted their interactions was replaced by a comfortable warmth. They spoke of practical matters, how Beatrice might continue her research using the ranch as a base once she was fully mobile, how Owen could assist with transportation to more remote collection sites, how they might introduce her to Maria Vasquez to learn about traditional plant preparations. It was a beginning, tentative but full of promise. Neither mentioned love or forever, but both felt the potential for those words hovering in the spaces between their conversations. As winter descended on the Arizona territory, Beatrice's recovery continued steadily. By early December, Dr. Morrison removed the splint, replacing it with a simpler bandage that allowed for greater mobility while her leg completed its healing. She began taking daily walks around the ranch, gradually increasing her distance and stamina. Owen proved an ideal research partner, his knowledge of the land complementing her scientific expertise. He showed her hidden meadows where rare plants flourished, introduced her to local ranchers and farmers who shared knowledge of plant uses passed down through generations, and arranged the promised meeting with Maria Vasquez, who took an immediate liking to Beatrice and began teaching her traditional preparation methods for medicinal herbs. Their relationship evolved as naturally as the changing seasons. The first time Owen kissed her was after a successful expedition to document a rare cactus flowering out of season. The shared excitement of the scientific discovery had left them both breathless, and when Beatrice turned to him, her eyes shining with triumph, it seemed the most natural thing in the world for him to lean down and press his lips gently against hers. The kiss was brief but electric, leaving them both startled by its intensity. Owen had immediately stepped back, apologizing, but Beatrice had silenced him by initiating a second kiss deeper, more certain. "No apologies," she had whispered against his lips. "Not for something we both want." From that point forward, they no longer pretended that what existed between them was merely friendship or professional collaboration. When Mrs. Henderson or Reverend Phillips visited, they maintained proper decorum, but alone together, they allowed themselves the freedom to explore their deepening connection. As Christmas approached, Beatrice knew a decision loomed. She had recovered sufficiently to return to town, and social propriety dictated that she should. Remaining at Owen's ranch now that her medical necessity had passed would certainly generate gossip, potentially damaging to her scientific credibility. On a snowy evening a week before Christmas, she raised the subject as they sat before the fireplace. "I should return to the boarding house after the holidays," she said quietly. "My continued presence here could raise questions." Owen nodded, though his expression tightened. "I've been thinking the same," he admitted. "Don't want to compromise your reputation. But I don't want to leave," Beatrice continued, reaching for his hand. "These months with you have been—" Words failed her. How could she express how profoundly her life had changed since the day a falling tree and a stranger's kindness had altered her carefully planned path? "I know," Owen said simply, understanding as always. "But there's an alternative, if you're willing to consider it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it in his closed fist for a moment before opening his palm to reveal a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Not fancy but solid, like what I'm offering." Beatrice stared at the ring, her heart racing. "Owen." "Marry me," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Not right away. I know you need to complete your research and return east with your findings. But if we're engaged, you could stay at Mrs. Henderson's, continue working with me without scandal, and we could plan for a future that honors both our paths." "How would that work?" Beatrice asked, her scientific mind immediately seeking practical solutions even as her heart soared at his proposal. "My career is in Washington. Your life is here." "I've been thinking about that too," Owen replied. "This ranch is mine free and clear, could be worked by a manager if needed, or sold if a different opportunity presented itself." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to give up your work, Beatrice. I'm asking if you're willing to find a boundary space where both our lives can flourish together." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes, not of sadness, but of profound recognition. This man truly saw her ambitions, her passion for science, her need for independence, and instead of asking her to diminish herself, he offered partnership. The Smithsonian has been considering establishing a permanent research station in the Southwest, she said, the idea forming as she spoke. The botanical diversity here warrants ongoing study, not just a single expedition, if I propose to oversee such a station. Owen's face brightened with hope. You could continue your scientific work while having a permanent base here. It would take time to arrange, Beatrice cautioned. And there's no guarantee they would approve such a proposal. But it's possible, Owen pressed gently. Yes, she agreed, her mind racing with the potential. It's possible. Owen held out the ring again. Then my question stands. Beatrice Galloway, will you marry me? Not today, not tomorrow, but when we've found the path that lets you be both the scientist you are and the wife I hope you'll become. Beatrice took the ring from his palm, studying its simple elegance in the firelight. My mother always told me I'd have to choose between my work and marriage, that no man would truly accept a wife with scientific ambitions. Your mother never met a man who learned from the Apache that the strongest survivors are those who adapt to changing conditions. Owen replied with a hint of a smile. Beatrice slid the ring onto her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, Owen Yates, I will marry you not despite my scientific ambitions but with them, not forsaking my path but finding where it runs alongside yours. The kiss that followed sealed more than a traditional engagement. It affirmed a partnership between equals, each bringing their unique strengths to create something neither could build alone. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Wickenburg. While some eyebrows raised at the unorthodox courtship, most townsfolk responded with approval. The story of how they had met the botanist trapped beneath a fallen tree, the rancher who saved her, had already become something of a local legend, romanticized with each retelling. After Christmas, Beatrice did return to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house as propriety demanded, but her days were still spent with Owen, documenting plant species across the territory as her research continued. In the evenings, they often joined community gatherings, where Beatrice's scientific knowledge and Owen's practical wisdom earned them growing respect. When spring arrived, bringing a spectacular wildflower bloom across the desert, Beatrice completed her formal research collection. The specimens she had documented, the traditional knowledge she had recorded from Maria Vasquez and others, and the potential medicinal applications she had identified exceeded the Smithsonian's expectations. The time came for her to return east to present her findings, a separation that both knew would be a test of their commitment. The night before her departure, they stood on Owen's porch beneath a canopy of stars. 6 months, Beatrice promised, her hands clasped in his. 6 months to present my research, propose the permanent station, and put my affairs in order. Then I'll return whether or not the Smithsonian approves my proposal. I'll be waiting, Owen assured her. This land has taught me patience. Write to me, she urged. Tell me about the ranch, the plants, the changing seasons. Help me hold this place in my heart until I can return to it. Every week, he promised, though I'm better with actions than words. Your actions spoke clearly enough when you lifted that tree and carried me to safety, Beatrice smiled, touching his face gently. The words will come. The separation proved as difficult as anticipated, but true to his word. Owen wrote regularly letters that began awkwardly but gradually revealed the depth of his thoughts and feelings, his observations of the land, his plans for their future. Beatrice treasured each one, reading them in her small Washington apartment when doubt or loneliness threatened her resolve. Her presentation to the Smithsonian Board was a triumph. The specimens she had collected, the detailed documentation of indigenous knowledge, and the potential medical applications of several plant compounds created a sensation in scientific circles. When she proposed the establishment of a permanent research station in the Arizona Territory, with herself as principal investigator, the board required little convincing. "Your work demonstrates precisely the kind of rigorous scientific investigation we had hoped for," the director told her. "And your proposal for ongoing research shows admirable foresight. However," he paused, "we understand you have personal reasons for wishing to return to the territory as well." Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I've become engaged to a rancher near Wickenburg who has been instrumental in facilitating my research. His knowledge of the land and connections with local communities have been invaluable scientific resources. And you believe you can maintain scientific objectivity while pursuing this personal connection. I believe my personal connection enhances rather than diminishes my scientific work," Beatrice replied confidently. "My fiancé respects and supports my research. Our partnership has already proven scientifically productive, as evidenced by the results I've presented." The director exchanged glances with the other board members before nodding. "Very well. The Smithsonian will establish the research station as proposed, with you as principal investigator. We'll expect quarterly reports and annual visits to Washington to present your findings." "Thank you, sir," Beatrice responded, her heart soaring at this validation of both her professional abilities and her personal choice. "You won't be disappointed." True to her promise, Beatrice returned to Wickenburg exactly 6 months after her departure. Owen was waiting at the station when the train arrived, his normally composed face alight with joy at the sight of her descending from the carriage. Protocol demanded restraint in their public reunion, but the moment they reached the privacy of his wagon, Owen pulled Beatrice into an embrace that expressed everything words could not. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying simultaneously. "Welcome home," Owen said simply. "Home," Beatrice repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, that's exactly what this is." They were married 2 weeks later in Wickenburg's small church, with Reverend Phillips officiating and the entire town turning out for the celebration. Beatrice wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from San Francisco, with desert mariposa lilies in her hair, a tribute to the flower that had first revealed Owen's thoughtful nature to her. Maria Vasquez surprised them with a wedding gift, a handcrafted book of pressed medicinal plants with detailed notes on their preparation and use, a treasure trove of traditional knowledge entrusted to them to preserve and honor. "Two who see with different eyes can find truth where one alone would miss it," the older woman told them. "This is why Creator brought you together." In the years that followed, the Smithsonian Research Station, housed in a purpose-built structure adjacent to Owen and Beatrice's ranch house, became an important center for botanical research in the Southwest. Beatrice published numerous scientific papers, gradually earning recognition not as a female botanist, but simply as one of the foremost botanical experts on desert flora. Owen managed the ranch while assisting with Beatrice's research expeditions, his practical knowledge and community connections proving invaluable to the scientific work. Together, they documented hundreds of plant species, preserved traditional knowledge of plant uses that might otherwise have been lost, and identified several compounds that eventually found their way into modern medical treatments. Their partnership flourished in other ways as well. 2 years after their marriage, Beatrice gave birth to a son they named Thomas after Owen's father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 3 years later. Both children grew up with an unusual education, formal schooling, supplemented by scientific expeditions, with their mother and practical ranch work with their father. Beatrice continued her scientific career without interruption, bringing the children with her on local research trips from infancy, and arranging for Owen to care for them during her periodic journeys to Washington. Far from limiting her work, motherhood seemed to enhance it, giving her new perspectives on the natural world she studied so intently. As the children grew, so did the legacy Owen and Beatrice were building together. Their research station expanded to include studies of wildlife and geology alongside the botanical work. Young scientists came to study under Beatrice's guidance, many of them women inspired by her example of combining scientific rigor with family life. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Owen had lifted a fallen tree from Beatrice's broken body. They returned to the stream where they had first openly acknowledged their feelings for each other. The cottonwoods were golden again, the water flowing clear over smooth stones. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that tree hadn't fallen on me?" Beatrice asked as they sat side by side on the same flat rock where they had talked years before. "If we had simply passed each other on the street in town instead?" Owen considered this, his face weathered by years of outdoor work but his blue eyes as clear and direct as ever. "I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway," he said finally. "Some connections seem inevitable." Beatrice smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "The scientist in me is skeptical of predestination." "And what does the woman in you say?" Owen asked, his arms slipping around her waist. "That some experiments yield unexpected results that change everything we thought we knew," she replied softly. "And that I'm profoundly grateful for fallen trees and strong cowboys with gentle hearts." Behind them, their children's laughter echoed as Thomas and Elizabeth explored the stream banks, collecting interesting stones and identifying plants their mother had taught them to recognize. Before them stretched years of continued discovery, scientific, personal, and shared. It wasn't the life Beatrice had imagined when she first arrived in Wickenburg with her specimen cases and ambitious research plans. It wasn't the solitary existence Owen had resigned himself to after the losses of his past. It was something neither could have created alone, a boundary space where both their worlds not only met but flourished together, proving that the richest diversity truly does occur where different ecosystems converge. And it had all begun with a falling tree, a cry for help, and the strong hands of a cowboy who lifted more than just timber when he carried a wounded botanist to safety.